What if the one girl who was never meant to witness the Alpha King's sacred mating ritual became the only one his wolf could sense in the entire forest? She hid in the shadows for just one forbidden glimpse of a world she would never belong to a servant girl, daring to watch a ceremony reserved for nobles' chosen females and fate itself. But the moment the Alpha King stepped into the sacred circle, everything changed. Because instead of choosing one of the women before him, his wolf caught the scent of someone hidden in the dark. And when his golden eyes locked onto her, the ritual shattered, the kingdom panicked, and a hunt began that would change both of their lives forever. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. The sacred grove lay beyond the last line of torchlit roads where the royal city gave up its stone and iron and let the forest reclaim the world. On most nights, it was simply woods old quiet and stubbornly alive. But on the first full moon of spring, it became something else. The darkness there was not the ordinary kind that arrived when the sun fell. It was thicker, as if the shadows had learned to hold their breath. Moonlight spilled through the crowns of ancient trees in pale bands, silver enough to make bark look like bone. 4 bonfires burned at the corners of the clearing, each one taller than a man, each one throwing gold and red across the trunks like living flame. The light did not warm the air so much as it sharpened it. Drums sounded from the center, slow, heavy strikes that traveled through the ground before they reached the ears. Each beat felt like the pulse of something vast beneath the soil, something older than stone law and royal blood. A ring of people surrounded the sacred stone circle. Nobles in fur-lined cloaks, elders draped in ceremonial silver, and royal warriors with black and iron armor that flashed when the fire caught it. No one spoke loudly, no one laughed. Even those who had arrived in carriages and carried the arrogance of birth stood subdued, as if the forest itself had placed a hand on the back of their necks. The air was dense with scent pheromones that did not belong to human courts. Dominance, submission, fear, pride. It pressed into lungs and clung to skin. Moon magic threaded through it, subtle but undeniable, like cold water poured into wine. This was the lunar choosing rite. It existed for one purpose, and everyone in the kingdom knew it, whether they admitted it aloud or not. If the Alpha King had not yet taken a mate, if the bond had not been sealed, then the wolf would choose under the eye of the moon goddess. Not politics, not alliances, not the careful arrangements of council chambers. The wolf. There were rules older than the throne itself. Only the chosen women who volunteered were permitted within the circle. Only the elders keepers of the rite stood close enough to speak the ancient language. And no one, absolutely no one, watched from the shadows. An uninvited witness was sacrilege. Selene Ashmore understood that more clearly than anyone. It was the only reason she was breathing as quietly as she could, pressed behind a broad oak at the edge of the clearing with her old cloak wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her fingers were white at the knuckles. The fabric beneath them was damp with night air. She could feel her heart hammering in her ribs, and the fear that someone would hear it was irrational, yet in that place, with that kind of magic in the wind, nothing felt entirely impossible. She should not have been there. If she was discovered, the mildest punishment she could imagine involved the lash and the loss of her position at Valmere Keep. The harsher ones were the kind servants whispered about when they were young and still believed the world had limits. But the truth, if she was honest enough to say it inside her own head, was that she had wanted to come the moment she first heard about the rite. It had started the previous night in the servants' quarters of Valmere Keep, in the cramped room where Selene slept, with Mira Fenlow and Elowen Briar. The 3 of them had been sprawled across their narrow beds after an endless day of scrubbing, carrying, hauling, and being invisible in a house that expected invisible work to keep its beauty intact. Mira had been the one to begin, voice bright with mischief and wine-thin courage. "Do you know what they do in the grove tomorrow night?" Alwyn had sat up, knees drawn to her chest, eyes wide in the half-dark. "Mira, don't start. I'm serious." Mira leaned forward, hair falling loose. "They say when the Alpha King chooses his mate, the whole forest feels the wolf's call. Not just people, trees, animals, the air, like something shifts." Celine, sitting on her bed with her hands folded in her lap, had tried to pretend she wasn't listening. She had learned early that pretending you didn't care was a kind of safety. Curiosity was dangerous in servant halls. Curiosity made you forget your place. Alawan's voice had dropped to a whisper. My grandmother said it's forbidden to watch. The moon goddess sees everything. Anyone who witnesses without permission is cursed. Mira had laughed softly, or she'd said, eyes gleaming, you get to see something you'll never see again. Ever. Imagine it. Bonfires, drums, the circle of stones. The Alpha King walking among the noble daughters like a god. Stop. Elowen had pleaded, but her gaze had flickered with the same desire, the same fear. Mira's grin had sharpened. Let's make it interesting. Tomorrow we race, buckets from the well to the kitchen before the bell. Whoever loses has to sneak to the grove and tell us everything. Celine had frowned. That's stupid. Mira had lifted her chin. So don't lose. Selene had accepted the challenge because she thought she could win, because she was tired and proud in the quiet way pride lives inside people who never get to show it, because she had not wanted Mira to see how badly she wanted to say yes. She lost. It wasn't even close. Her hands had been shaking by the last run breath tearing in her throat while Mira, somehow always fueled by spite and laughter, had moved like water. When the kitchen bell finally rang, Selena had stood over her bucket soaked and panting, and Mira had leaned in close with a grin that knew exactly what it was doing. Looks like you're going to see the moonlight, Celine. Celine had wanted to refuse, wanted to throw the bucket and call the whole thing childish. But she could still hear Mira's earlier words, something you'll never see again. She could still picture the stories she'd overheard in hallways, the rare moments when nobles spoke too freely and forgot servants existed. And there was a deeper truth beneath all of it. She wanted to see the world that had always been kept just out of her reach. So she went. Now, crouched behind the oak with the clearing in front of her, Celine realized what an enormous mistake desire could be. The chosen women entered the circle in a line. Their dresses were moon white and silver-threaded fabric that caught firelight like water. Their hair was braided with true silver and moon-thread-thin pale cords that seemed to drink the moonlight and hold it. They moved with the confidence of girls raised in rooms with mirrors taught their own worth like scripture. Each one of them was beautiful. Each one of them belonged. Selena looked down at herself. The rough servant dress, dark and plain, the hem still marked with dried mud from earlier chores. Her cloak was patched at the elbows. Her shoes were worn thin. A single thought rose in her, sharp as the cold. I don't belong here. The drums shifted, 3 beats deeper and closer together. The elders within the circle raised their hands, and an ancient language began to flow like in tongue, old enough that even the nobles listening from the outer ring did not understand the words, only the weight of them. The bonfires flared, and then the forest changed again. Not because of the magic, because he arrived. The drums stopped mid-beat, as if they had been commanded into silence. A pressure rolled over the clearing, not physical force, not wind, but presence. The kind that made knees soften and backs straighten. Dominance heavy enough to feel like a hand pushing down on shoulders. A figure stepped into the firelight. Kael Draven, the Alpha King. Celine had heard his name spoken in Valmir Keep, in the same tone servants used for storms. They whispered about his coronation, about how young he was, and how the wolf in him had been born sharp and violent, as if it had been waiting for centuries to wear a crown. They spoke about his eyes, how they changed, how gold could become something brighter, fiercer, not quite human. None of it had prepared her for the reality of him. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, moving with a slow, deliberate certainty that made it obvious he had never needed to rush. His ceremonial cloak was black with silver lining the fabric, heavy and regal. His hair, dark or ash blonde under the shifting firelight, was tied at the nape of his neck. The fire painted his face in harsh angles, cheekbones like carved stone mouth, set in a calm line that looked as if it had never had to ask for anything. But it was the aura that terrified her most. His dominance wasn't performed, it wasn't postured, it simply existed. and the bodies around him responded before minds could make sense of why. A few lower-ranked wolves in the outer ring bowed their heads without realizing it. One noble woman swallowed hard throat, working as if her body had remembered an instinct it pretended not to have. Celine's breath caught, and for a moment she was sure her lungs had forgotten how to work. She had never understood the phrase, "he fills the room," until now. Kyle Draven stepped into the circle, and the circle belonged to him. The elders' chanting sharpened. The ritual began. Kyle moved between the chosen women, slow, controlled, like a predator that did not need speed because nothing escaped it unless it allowed it. Each woman stood very still, eyes forward, shoulders back. Their families waited in the outer ring with clenched pride. This rite was political even when everyone pretended it wasn't. A chosen mate meant a house elevated beyond measure. Kyle passed the first woman without changing expression, the second, the third. He circled the stones once, and when he returned toward the center, Selena realized something was wrong. He wasn't reacting to any of them. The women were trembling now in tiny ways they tried to hide. The nobles in the outer ring began to shift and murmur. A counselor's mouth tightened. Then Kyle stopped. It was not a thoughtful pause. It was abrupt, like an unseen chain had snapped tight around his spine. His shoulders rose, his head tilted slightly. He drew in a breath slow and deep, and Celine felt with a chill that had nothing to do with night air that he wasn't smelling the bonfires or the ritual incense. He was tasting the air like an animal. Another inhale, stronger. His jaw tightened. Tendons jumped beneath his skin. A quiet tension rolled through his body like something waking up, and his eyes changed. Gold flared in them, fierce and bright, as if the firelight had moved into his irises and refused to leave. Celine's heart stopped, because he was no longer looking at the women in the circle. He was looking straight into the trees, straight at her. The distance between them, the stones, the fire, the bodies vanished beneath that gaze. It was too direct, too precise. Not the searching look of someone who might have seen movement, the look of someone who already knew. Celine froze for exactly one heartbeat. Then fear snapped her limbs into motion. She turned and ran. Branches lashed at her face. Leaves slapped against her cheeks. Her cloak snagged on thorns, yanking at her shoulder hard enough to sting. She stumbled, once recovered, kept going. Behind her, the clearing erupted. Not into screams, not at first, but into voices of alarm, shock, confusion. The drums tried to resume, but faltered. The elders' chanting broke like a rope. Celine ran faster. A growl, low and deep, rolled through the forest. It did not come from a human throat. Kyle had moved. He stepped out of the ritual line as if the rite no longer existed. Elder Thorian Voss, the oldest and most feared keeper of pack law, raised his voice sharp as a whip. "Your Majesty, the rite is not complete." Kale did not look at him. "Move," he said. It was a simple word, but it carried the authority of an alpha that did not negotiate. The crowd in the outer ring shifted back half a step instinctively. Even some elders flinched. The royal guard stepped in front of him anyway. 4 warriors chosen not for courage, but for discipline. Their hands were on their weapons, but no one wanted to draw steel on their own king. One guard reached out, fingers closing around Kale's forearm. The moment contact was made, something changed in the air, as if the wolf beneath Kale's skin had turned its head toward that touch. Thorian's voice remained steady, though his eyes were strained. "No alpha leaves the circle while the moon witness is open. If you break the rite..." Kyle's gaze snapped up, and his eyes were brighter gold now, less stable, less human. "I don't care," he said, each syllable gritted through clenched teeth. The guard tightened his grip. Another guard moved to restrain Kale's other arm. A sound rose from Kyle's chest, not speech, not quite. A growl that vibrated through bone. The dominance in the clearing surged outward like a wave. Noble daughters stumbled. Low-ranked wolves in the outer ring dropped their gazes. Someone gasped. Kale's body trembled. For a moment, just a moment, Celine imagined him fighting himself the way men did when they pretended control was a choice. Then the fight ended. Transformation was not graceful. It was surrender with teeth. Kale's shoulders jerked. His spine arched. Bones shifted with a cracking sound that made some in the circle recoil. Fingers curled, nails sharpening into claws. His cloak tore as his frame expanded. Muscle rolling beneath skin. And in the space of a few heartbeats, what stood among the sacred stones was no longer a king in human form. It was a wolf, huge, too large for comfort, too large to feel like a creature that should exist in the same world as men. Its coat was dark with silver streaks that caught the firelight like steel. Its eyes burned amber gold, fierce and single-minded. The guards stepped back, not because they had chosen to, because the wolf's presence demanded space. The wolf did not hesitate. It lunged, leaping the boundary of the circle as if the stones were nothing. Nobles scattered. Elders fell silent, the right broken in front of the entire kingdom. And then the Alpha King vanished into the forest after a servant girl no one was supposed to see. Celine ran until her lungs were raw. She did not know where she was going. She only knew what was behind her. The sound of the wolf moved through the woods like a storm, branches snapping, leaves tearing, earth thudding beneath massive paws. The ground seemed to tremble. She tried to keep her sobs quiet, choking them back in her throat. Tears blurred her vision. Her legs were shaking, and still she forced them forward. The moon hung above the canopy, pale and pitiless. Her foot struck something hidden under leaves, a root or stone. The world lurched. She threw her arms out, grasping for air, and then the ground disappeared. She fell into a ravine she had not seen, steep, slick with wet moss. Her body hit the slope and rolled. Pain exploded through her shoulder when she slammed into rock. Her ribs jarred as she struck something hard again. She tried to grab a branch, but her hands slid on wet bark. She tumbled until her left side crashed into a tree at the bottom with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. For a few terrible seconds, she could not inhale. She lay on cold leaves, mouth open, eyes wide, and nothing happened. Then air surged back into her chest with a painful gasp. And pain arrived all at once, shoulder, ribs, knees, the scraped palm of her hand. She curled slightly, coughing, trying not to make sound. Above her, the wolf arrived. She heard it before she saw it, the heavy landing near the ravine's edge, the scrape of claws on stone, the deep inhale that followed. The scent was everywhere now, her scent smeared across leaves and mud and moss, spread chaotically by her fall. It did not lead in a clean line. It was a storm of traces, and the wolf stood still, as if offended by the mess of it. Celine pressed herself into a narrow space between a boulder and a thicket of low brush. She did not know if she would fit. She did not know if it would hide her. She only knew her body wanted smaller, smaller, smaller. The wolf leapt down into the ravine. It landed hard. It moved slow, now head lowered as it tracked every patch of earth. Its breathing was loud, frustrated. It came close enough that Celine could have reached out and touched its fur, close enough that she could smell smoke and blood-warm animal heat. She clamped her teeth together to stop herself from crying out. The wolf paused, its head lifted, nostrils flaring. For one suspended heartbeat, Celine was certain it had found her. She could feel its attention like pressure. Her blood turned to ice, then it turned away. It moved past her hiding place, missing her by inches, and Celine nearly collapsed from relief that tasted like terror. She did not understand how she had not been discovered. She did not dare question it. The wolf growled low and furious, the sound shaking leaves. It searched again and again, and when it finally could not find what it wanted, it lifted its head and let out a sound that was not a howl so much as a demand. The forest answered with silence. After too long, the wolf's body shuddered, and Celine heard the scrape and crack of shifting again. When she dared to peek through the brush, she saw a man now in the ravine, Draven. Bare-headed hair, loose chest rising and falling hard. His eyes were still gold, but dimmer, more contained. He stood motionless, staring at the earth, as if staring hard enough could force reality to comply. "Who are you?" he said into the wind voice, low, rough, with the aftertaste of the wolf. Celine pressed a hand over her mouth. The man looked up slow, scanning the ravine, and even without seeing her, Celine felt the weight of him, the need, the insistence. Then at last, footsteps sounded above other men arriving, moving cautiously. Royal hunters. Celine heard one of them call uncertain. Your Majesty Kale did not answer right away. When he did not look up. Spread out, he said. Search the entire forest. There was a pause, then another voice, Ronan Black, the king's beta, steady and alarmed. Be-ha, he started. then corrected himself, voice sharp with restraint. Your Majesty. The right. Kyle turned his head. His eyes flashed and Ronan went silent. Find her, Kyle said. It was not a request. Now. Selene stayed hidden until the first gray light of morning filtered through the ravine and the sounds above faded farther away. She crawled out on shaking limbs, pain flaring with every movement. She did not know where she was. She did not know how to get back. She only knew she had to be gone before anyone returned. By the time she staggered back toward Valmir Keep, the kingdom had already begun to change its story of the night. In the capital, the news moved faster than horses. It leapt from mouth to mouth like fire. The Alpha King had broken the sacred rite. The Alpha King had shifted in front of the noble houses. The Alpha King had abandoned the daughters of the realm for an unknown girl in the woods. Some said it was witchcraft. Some said it was a curse. Some whispered the moon goddess was displeased and had driven their king mad. Others claimed it was a sign of war. In council chambers, the elders' faces were stone. In noble halls, fathers wrote furious letters. In servant corridors, people spoke with eyes wide because when kings lost control, the world trembled. Cale Draven entered the council chamber the following afternoon without waiting to be announced. The chamber was cold, built of pale stone that held winter in its bones. Tall candles burned in iron holders, their flames thin and rigid. Elders and counselors sat around a long table carved with pack symbols older than the kingdom itself. Elder Thorian Voss spoke first as he always did. Your Majesty broke the lunar choosing rite before every great house in the realm. Kyle did not sit. He stood at the head of the table, hands clasped behind his back, expression unreadable. Another lord leaned forward. 3 houses sent formal protest before sunrise. House Meyerwood demands compensation. House Greythorn threatens to withdraw their oath. Cale's eyes moved over them, calm enough to infuriate. Thorian's voice tightened. What possessed you to do it? Cale answered without hesitation. My wolf recognized another. Silence fell like a slab of stone. A counselor half rose from his chair, incredulous. Another, someone outside the circle. That is impossible, it happened. Kyle said, cutting through him. Thorian's jaw clenched. Even if it did, it does not erase duty. The alliance marriage must proceed. The throne cannot be ruled by impulse. Cale's gaze chilled. No. Murmurs erupted. A lord struck the table with his palm. You will dissolve a treaty because you smelled something in the forest. Cale's voice dropped, and the room adjusted around it the way rooms did when an alpha spoke. I will not marry another when my wolf has recognized its mate. Thorian's eyes narrowed. You do not know who she is. My wolf knows her scent, Cale said. That is enough. It is not enough for the kingdom, a counselor snapped. Kyle leaned forward slightly, and several men flinched without meaning to. Then the kingdom will learn what enough looks like. Ronan Black, standing behind Cale like a shadow with a blade, cleared his throat carefully. Your Majesty, if she was near enough for the wolf to catch her scent, she may belong to a household close to the capital. Cale nodded once. Find her. Thorian's voice turned dangerous. And what if this mate is a servant, a human? What if she is nothing? Cale's eyes flashed gold for a heartbeat. Then she is still mine. The council chamber went very still. Kyle straightened. Continue your protests if you wish. Send your letters. Whisper about curses. I will go where I need to go. He turned, ending the meeting by ending his attention. Behind the calm line of his shoulders, the wolf paced in his blood, restless and furious at the emptiness it had been forced to accept. At Valmir Keep, Selene moved through the next days like a ghost. She returned just before dawn, the morning after the rite, slipping through the servants' entrance, with her hood drawn low. Mud stained her skirt up to the knee. Her shoulder ached so badly it made her vision blur when she moved wrong. She scrubbed her scraped hand until it burned because the thought of the wolf smelling her again made her skin crawl. Mira and Elowin were awake, waiting. Mira's face went pale when Selene stepped into the room. Saints, Selene, what happened? Selene closed the door behind her with shaking fingers. I think he saw me. Elowin's hands flew to her mouth. No, Mira whispered, horrified and thrilled all at once. The Alpha King Selene sat on the edge of her bed and let her head drop into her hands. He looked straight at me. Then he broke the rite. Mira's mouth fell open. For once, she had nothing clever to say. Alawan moved first, kneeling beside Selene. Are you hurt? Nothing. I can't work through. Selena lied. She slept for 2 hours. When she woke, she felt worse because the forest had not let her go. That night, she dreamed of gold eyes and moonlight. She dreamed of a man standing in a clearing with bonfires behind him and a hunger that was not just physical. She woke with her throat dry and her skin too warm, as if the dream had left fingerprints. The next night was the same. And the next, she tried to force herself into routine laundry floors carrying trays. She told herself that time would smooth the edges, that the king would forget, that the wolf would be pulled back into politics and ritual and the thousand demands of a throne. But her body did not agree. When the moon rose, something in her chest tightened, like an invisible thread tugging in a direction she could not name. Some nights she had to grip the edge of a table to steady herself because the pull came in a sudden wave sharp enough to steal breath. Once late in the evening, she stood near a window and realized she could hear footsteps at the far end of the corridor. 2 turns away, light steps, the hush of slippers on stone. She frowned, turning her head as if that could change what she was sensing. A minute later, 2 maids walked past the door whispering. Selene heard every word. I heard the king shifted with his own guards holding him. They say the wolf was angry, like it was chasing something it had already claimed. Selene stepped back from the door, heart pounding. She had never been able to hear through walls like that. Later, she tied her hair in front of the small mirror by moonlight. Her face looked pale, her eyes too dark with exhaustion. She leaned closer, searching for signs of fever. For one flickering moment, her pupils reflected gold. Selene froze. She blinked hard. The gold was gone. Only gray remained familiar and ordinary. It's lack of sleep, she whispered to her reflection. It's fear, that's all. But the unease stayed. Something about her had changed the moment she became tied to the Alpha King, but was it only the effect of their bond or something far older awakening inside her? Tell us what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe before we step into the most powerful part of the story. Then 3 days after the Right Valmir keep exploded into preparation. Servants ran with armfuls of linens and polished silver. The kitchen smoked with effort. Guards were doubled at the gates. Lady Seraphine Valmir, the keep's proud jewel, spent the afternoon in the solar with her ladies selecting dresses and jewelry as if preparing for war. News filtered down to the servants' wing in gasped whispers. Alpha King Kyle Draven will arrive tonight. Selene was carrying a tray when she heard it. The metal nearly slipped from her hands. The thread in her chest pulled tight enough to hurt. Mira grabbed her elbow, eyes wide. He's coming here. Selene forced her voice to stay flat. He's here for Seraphine. She's the political choice. Everyone knows that. Mira's gaze sharpened. Do they? Alawan's face was white. Selene, what if he comes because of you? Selene swallowed hard. Don't say that. But the moment she said it, she knew she didn't believe herself. The courtyard filled with sound at sunset. Hooves struck stone in disciplined rhythm. The royal banner black wolf on silver snapped in the wind. Soldiers in dark armor rode through the gates with grim precision. Kyle Draven was at the head. He rode like a man who belonged to the world and expected the world to remember it. His posture was effortless. His eyes swept the courtyard once, and the noise seemed to dampen as if the air itself wanted to be quieter around him. Selene was on her knees at the base of the fountain, scrubbing the stone with a worn rag. She felt him before she saw him, the same pressure as the grove, the same dominance that made the space around him adjust. Her chest tightened. Not fear, exactly. Something deeper, something that felt like recognition coming from inside her bones. Kyle passed through the gate and stopped. The entire procession behind him halted, reacting like a single body. Horses snorted and stamped, then stilled. His gaze moved over the courtyard, over Lady Seraphine, descending the steps with practiced elegance, over the nobles gathered to witness, over servants bowed low. And then his eyes locked on Selene. The air turned to glass. A tray slipped from someone's hands and clattered on stone. No one moved to pick it up. Kyle dismounted slowly. The movement was unhurried, but there was a dangerous certainty in it. He walked across the courtyard as if there were no witnesses, as if the only thing that mattered in the world was the girl kneeling by the fountain. Celine's hands went numb. She lifted her head because she could not help it. He stopped in front of her. Gold eyes, not bright enough to blaze, but unmistakably changed. Focused. He looked down at her as if she had been missing from his world and the world had been wrong without her. "Found you," he said. The words were quiet. They didn't need volume. They carried the weight of a claim. Celine couldn't breathe. From the steps above, Lady Seraphine's smile stiffened. She recovered quickly because she had been trained to recover, but Celine saw the fraction of a moment when something cold flickered in her eyes. "Your Majesty," Seraphine said, warmly voice like polished silk. "What an honor." Cale's gaze shifted to Seraphine for the briefest moment, then returned to Celine, as if Seraphine's existence had only interrupted his thought. "The honor is mine," Kyle replied, and his tone was perfectly civil. But his eyes went back to Celine again. As the royal party moved inside, Celine rose on shaking legs and forced herself to carry on as if she were not the center of a storm. That was what servants did. They became background. They became furniture. They pretended the world wasn't looking. It didn't work. Dinner that night was a performance with knives hidden under the table. The great hall was bright with chandeliers. Silver and crystal lined the long oak table. Nobles and lords spoke in carefully chosen sentences about harvest and roads and safe topics that meant nothing. Cale sat near Seraphine at the seat of honor. He played the role of visiting king with flawless ease. And Celine, because cruelty often arrived dressed as duty, was assigned to serve wine. She carried the pitcher with both hands, moving along the table, filling goblets. Her face was calm because she had practiced calm like prayer. But when she reached Cale's side, her body betrayed her. The pull in her chest sharpened. Heat rose under her skin. She felt his gaze before she dared to glance up. His eyes were on her, not like a king noticing a servant, like a predator tracking something it already knew. Celine tipped the pitcher to fill his glass. Her hand trembled. A single drop of wine spilled onto the back of his hand. Celine's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty." Before she could move away, Cale's fingers closed gently around her wrist. The touch was simple, casual, but it sent a shock through Celine's body as if something inside her had recognized him and leaned forward without permission. "It's fine," Cale said. He did not release her immediately. His thumb rested against the pulse point of her wrist, as if he could feel her heartbeat racing. His gaze stayed on her face too long for the setting, too long for propriety. Celine forced herself to breathe. She forced herself not to look at Seraphine across the table because she could feel Seraphine's attention like a blade. Cale finally let go, and Celine stepped away as if escaping. Across the table, Seraphine's nails pressed into her palm beneath the cloth. She smiled at a lord's joke and did not laugh. Later, long after the last course, Celine lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The bond pole tugged like a thread tied to her ribs. It drew her not to warmth but to air. Her feet carried her out of the servant's wing almost without thought. She climbed narrow stairs to the northern rooftop, a place servants sometimes went when they needed a moment of quiet and the castle forgot they existed. The night was cold. The moon hung bright above the keep, and the world below looked unreal under its silver wash. Celine stepped to the parapet and drew in a deep breath, and realized she was not alone. Kyle stood a few yards away, leaning against the stone as if he had been there the whole time. He turned his head slightly when she froze. "I wondered how long it would take," he said. Celine's fingers tightened on the parapet. "For what? For you to come to me." "I didn't come to you," she said quickly. "I come here sometimes for air." Kyle pushed away from the wall with an unhurried movement that somehow shortened the distance between them. "Do you think I don't know?" that he asked softly. "Do you think I don't know where you hide when you can't breathe in the rooms below?" Celine's throat went dry. "Why are you here?" Kyle studied her like he was reading something written beneath her skin. "Because my wolf won't be quiet," he said. Celine lifted her chin because lowering it felt like surrender. Your wolf doesn't get to decide what happens to me. A faint curve touched the corner of Kyle's mouth. Not amusement, something darker. My wolf already decided, he said. On the night of the rite. Celine's heartbeat stumbled. You're mistaken? I'm not. He took a step closer. I smelled you in the trees. I felt you there. Do you know what it took to stop myself from tearing through my own guards? Selene swallowed. I didn't mean to, I know. His voice dropped lower. But it happened anyway. He was close enough now that Selene could feel heat coming off him despite the cold night. It made no sense. It made too much sense. Wolf of mine chose you, Kale said, each word controlled. Not one of the noble daughters in that circle. You. Selena's voice shook despite her effort. I'm a servant. Kyle's gaze sharpened as if that word irritated him. I'm not asking what you are in this keep. You can't make me, I can, he said, quiet, and the certainty in it made her knees want to soften. Selene forced herself to step back. You came here for Lady Seraphine, that's what everyone says. I came here to confirm whether my wolf was right, Kale said. It was. Selene's chest tightened. Even if it was, what then? You're the Alpha King, you have obligations, you have treaties. Kale's eyes flicked to her mouth, and back to her eyes. I have you, he said. The words struck something deep in her, and her body betrayed her with a rush of warmth that had nothing to do with the air. Selene shook her head hard. You don't understand. People like you don't what? Kyle asked, voice dangerously calm. Selena's hands clenched at her sides. Don't see people like me? For a moment, something flickered in Kyle's expression. Not anger, but something like offense. Look at me, he said. Selena tried not to. Her gaze snapped to his anyway. Who decides your place? He asked. The world does. Selena replied, bitterer than she intended. Kyle's mouth curved slightly. I am the king of that world. Silence filled the space between them, thick and intimate. The moonlight painted Kale's features in pale silver. Selene could see the slight flare of gold in his eyes, the barely contained wolf beneath his skin. Kyle lifted his hand slowly, as if giving her time to run. His fingers came beneath her chin and tipped her face up. Selene's breath hitched. Tell me you don't feel this, he murmured. She wanted to lie. She had been lying her entire life just to survive, but her body was too honest. Her pulse raced under his thumb. Her skin warmed where his hand touched. Kyle leaned in. His mouth was a breath away. Selene's mind screamed, this will ruin you. This will ruin everyone. She shoved his chest with both hands and stumbled back, heart pounding. Kyle didn't chase her immediately. He watched, eyes dark with something that looked too much like satisfaction. Selene turned and ran down the stairwell, cloak snapping behind her. She didn't see the shadow at the bottom of the stairs, but Seraphine did. She had followed quietly the way a woman used to court games knew how to move unseen. She stood in the narrow passage below the rooftop steps and watched Selene flee with her face pale and her breathing ragged, watched Kale Draven remain above, motionless, as if the night belonged to him, and the girl running from him belonged to him too. Seraphine's fingers tightened around the stone railing until her knuckles whitened. The look in Kale's eyes was not curiosity, it was recognition, it was claim, and Seraphine understood with the cold clarity of someone who had been raised to read power the way others read prayer that a maid had become a threat she could not afford to ignore. If a servant could make the Alpha King stop a sacred rite, then the servant had to disappear. Seraphine did not storm back to her chambers after the rooftop. She did not fling a goblet across the room or lash out at the nearest servant to bleed off her rage. That kind of spectacle was for women who had nothing to lose. Seraphine Valmir had been raised in rooms where anger was wasted unless it bought something. So she returned to her solar with a calm face and hands that did not shake, and she let the fury settle into something colder, into calculation. By morning, the keep felt different, though no one could have explained why. The servants moved with their eyes lowered and their voices smaller. Even the noble ladies who giggled over breakfast did so with a strange restraint, as if laughter might offend the wrong person and bring ruin down like a ceiling collapsing. Seraphine's silence did more than shouting ever could. When she summoned Matron Hester Vale to her private study, the older woman arrived with her spine straight and her mouth careful. 2 guards followed women loyal to House Valmir, their cloaks pinned with the pale crest that had once represented stability and privilege, and now, if Seraphine had her way, would represent victory. Seraphine gestured to the chair across from her desk. Hester sat hands folded tightly. Seraphine didn't sit. She stood by the window, watching the courtyard below as if the day's weather mattered more than the conversation she was about to have. "I want to know who that girl is," Seraphine said softly. Hester blinked. "My lady. Not her name." Seraphine's voice remained almost gentle, her past, her origins, everything that exists behind the blank look she wears as if it's a shield. Hester hesitated a fraction. Celine Ashmore is a servant, an orphan. She was brought in 8 years old. Seraphine's tone sharpened slightly. "So the records say?" Hester's throat worked. "Yes, my lady." Seraphine turned from the window at last, and the light caught her eyes cold and pale like frost on steel. "Go to the servant intake ledgers, the old ones, not the copies kept for convenience, the original pages. I want every note, every stamp, every signature." Hester bowed her head. "As you command." And Seraphine added, letting the word land with precision if the records are incomplete. "I want to know why." Hester's hands tightened. "Yes, my lady." The investigation began quietly, as Seraphine preferred. Servants were sent to the oldest storage rooms. Keys were fetched that had not been used in years. Dust rose from chests. Cloth-wrapped ledgers were opened with careful hands. Names that meant nothing were read aloud. Children brought in after plagues. Girls sold by desperate families, boys apprenticed in kitchens and stables. Then Celine's page was found. It was ordinary at first glance, a simple entry, a date, a note that a girl had been brought to Valmir Keep after unfortunate circumstances. A rough description of her hair and eyes, the name Celine Ashmore written in ink that had faded to brown. But what was missing made the page feel wrong? Parents unknown? Birthplace unrecorded? Bloodline mark blank? Sponsor none. And the edges of the page, Seraphine saw it the moment Hester laid the ledger in front of her, were torn in places as if something had once been attached and later ripped away. Hester kept her gaze down. "She may have been abandoned, my lady. It happens. Orphans arrive often enough." Seraphine stared at the blank spaces until she could almost hear them whispering. Then she said very quietly, "It's precisely because she is empty on paper that she is dangerous." Hester's mouth opened, then closed. Seraphine leaned a finger on the torn edge. A girl with no recorded origin, no claim, no ties, no one to ask where she goes when she disappears. She lifted her eyes to Hester. "Tell me, matron, how easy is it to erase a person no one can prove existed?" Hester swallowed. Easy, she admitted. Seraphine's smile was thin. "Exactly." She dismissed Hester with a wave, and when she was alone again, she stood at the window and watched servants cross the courtyard like ants. Somewhere below, Selena Ashmore was moving through the keep, doing what she had always done, washing, scrubbing, carrying, vanishing. And yet Cale Draven had seen her, not only seen her, stopped for her, hunt for her, spoken to her in a way no king spoke to a servant unless something inside him had already decided the servant was not a servant at all. Seraphine's fingers tightened on the window frame. If the Alpha King's wolf had recognized Selena, then Celine was a threat to the world Seraphine had been promised since she first learned how to hold a smile without letting teeth show. A threat did not need to be killed dramatically, a threat only needed to be removed cleanly. Celine felt the change in the keep long before anyone said anything to her. It was in the way kitchen girls stopped talking when she entered a pantry. It was in the way older servants watched her with strange, uneasy eyes. It was in the way noble ladies looked through her as if she were a stain they couldn't scrub off the floor. Whispers followed her like smoke. "She's the one. She made the king break the right. I saw him hold her wrist. Witch, curse, mate." Celine told herself she didn't care. She told herself she had lived under worse eyes, worse judgments. She told herself to keep moving and keep her head down and let rumor burn itself out. But her body refused to be calm. The pull in her chest came and went like an invisible tide. Some mornings she woke with the strange certainty that Cale Draven was thinking about her, though she had no proof and hated herself for believing it. Mira cornered her in the pantry one afternoon, hands flour-dusted, eyes wide with frantic energy. "This is bad," she whispered. "It's all anyone is talking about. The kitchen boys are betting whether you'll be dragged out by the hair or crowned in gold." Celine's voice came out dry. "They can keep their bets." Alawan appeared behind Mira, her face too pale. "Celine, maybe you should avoid the main halls for a few days, just until the king leaves." Celine shook her head. "If I hide, they'll only believe I have something to hide." Mira scoffed. "You do have something to hide. It's called the Alpha King wants you." Celine's stomach tightened. "Don't say that." "Why not?" Mira demanded. "It happened. We've all seen him look at you like I'm not allowed to exist." Celine finished quieter. That shut Mira's mouth for a second. Alawan's eyes softened. "That isn't what I meant," she said gently. Celine forced a small breath. "I know." But the truth was simple. Nothing was going back to normal. Not after the forest, not after the courtyard, not after the rooftop, and Seraphine Valmir Celine suspected did not forgive threats. The humiliation came dressed in silk and perfume. Seraphine announced a small afternoon tea in the inner salon, an intimate gathering meant to soothe nerves and display hospitality to the noble ladies staying at Valmir Keep. The invitation list wasn't large, but it was carefully chosen enough high-blooded witnesses to carry words back to their families, enough head servants to make sure the servant class understood what was being demonstrated. Celine learned she would be serving when Matron Hester stopped her in the corridor and handed her a polished tray. "The lady requests you personally," Hester said, expression flat. Celine's fingers tightened around the tray edge. "Me," Hester didn't soften. "You." Celine understood immediately this was not coincidence. This was not duty. This was a message. She entered the salon with the silver tray, balanced carefully, the porcelain cups arranged like a tiny battlefield. The room smelled of white blossoms and hot tea. Sunlight poured through tall windows and made everything look too perfect. Gold light on pale upholstery, fresh flowers in crystal vases, ladies in dresses that cost more than Celine would earn in a lifetime. In the middle of it all, Celine felt like a mark of dirt on a freshly washed floor. Seraphine sat in the central chair gown, a muted blue-gray that fell around her like cold water. Her smile was flawless. Her eyes were not. Celine approached, head lowered, hands steady through practice. She began to pour. Seraphine's voice rose calm and sweet and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Lift your face." Celine's hands paused. "I want everyone to see you properly," Seraphine added. The room went quiet. The noble ladies shifted, slightly interested now. Head servants stood straighter, their attention sharpening. Celine raised her face slowly. She felt every gaze strike her like needles. Seraphine tilted her head as if curious. "How old were you when you came to Valmir?" Celine kept her voice respectful. "8, my lady." Seraphine's smile widened fractionally. 8. So you've grown up inside these walls. She let her gaze travel over Celine's rough dress, the faint bruising still visible near her collarbone if one knew where to look. "And yet you never learned how to stand in the place meant for you." A few noble women exchanged glances. One hid a smile behind a lace fan. Another's expression held that polished cruelty of people who had never been powerless. Celine swallowed. She had learned to endure insults the way she had learned to scrub stones steadily without reaction, because reaction only encouraged more. Seraphine lifted her cup and set it down again with delicate precision. "I've heard," she said lightly, "that some people have recently begun confusing being noticed with having worth." The words floated in the air like scented poison. Celine bowed her head a fraction. "I would never presume, wouldn't you?" Seraphine interrupted, voice honeyed but sharp. Or are you simply not clever enough to understand what you're doing? A soft laugh rustled behind a fan. Celine's cheeks burned. She kept her eyes on the tray. Seraphine continued as if explaining a lesson to a child. A king may notice many things: a misstep in ritual, a strange scent, a moment of instinct, a passing indulgence. She paused and looked directly at Celine as though the entire room had narrowed to this point. But that does not turn earth into starlight. Celine said nothing. Her jaw tightened so hard her teeth ached. Seraphine's smile returned slow, deliberate. A king may desire many things, she said softly, but he does not crown them all. The sentence landed like a slap. The salon went still. Some women lowered their eyes, pretending elegance meant not witnessing cruelty. Others watched Celine closely, waiting for her to crumble. Celine forced her voice to remain smooth. If my lady is finished, may I return to my work? Seraphine's eyes flicked down to Celine's hands, calloused servant hands, and back up. Do you truly believe that Alpha King looks at you for who you are? She asked, voice gentle enough to sound sincere. Celine felt the room lean in. You are an anomaly, Seraphine said, tone sharpening. A curiosity, a scent that caught an animal's attention. Do not mistake that for destiny. Celine lowered her head slowly. I have never believed I was anyone's destiny. Her answer held no bite, no rebellion, only truth. And for that reason, it irritated Seraphine more than defiance would have. Seraphine stared at Celine as if searching for cracks that weren't there, then lifted her cup again and turned her attention elsewhere, dismissing Celine without offering the courtesy of dismissal. Celine left the salon with her steps even and her face calm. Only when she reached a quiet corridor did her hands begin to shake. She set the tray down on a stone windowsill and pressed her palms flat against the cold stone, as if the chill could press the heat out of her cheeks. The pain in her chest wasn't the bond pull this time. It was something older, deeper. The fear Seraphine had aimed at her with perfect accuracy, that Cale Draven's attention was not protection, but a passing storm, and that Celine would be crushed beneath it. Mira found her a few minutes later, breathless. I heard, she whispered fiercely. I heard everything. Celine didn't look up. Don't. Mira's voice cracked. Celine, don't. Celine repeated sharper now. If you talk, if you make it bigger, she'll come for you. Elowen arrived behind Mira, eyes red. We should leave, she murmured. We should leave this keep, all of us. Celine turned her head, then looking at her two friends. Mira's anger, Elowen's fear, both of them tied to her now because she had been foolish enough to step into a sacred forest and be seen. If I hadn't gone to the right, Celine said quietly, none of this would touch you. Mira opened her mouth to argue. Celine turned away before she could, not because she wanted the last word, but because she could feel tears gathering and she refused to let them fall where anyone might see. That night, the servant wing went dark early. The keep itself was quiet in the way large houses became quiet when something dangerous was being decided behind closed doors. The corridors felt colder. The shadows seemed sharper. Celine lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to tell her racing heart that fear was not prophecy. The door opened without a knock. Candlelight entered first, then Seraphine Valmir. She wore a dark robe of silk that absorbed light. Her hair was loose but still perfect, as if even sleep was not permitted to touch her. Two female guards flanked her like shadows. Mira sat up instantly. My lady, Silent Seraphine said without looking at her. Her gaze locked on Celine, as if Celine were the only person in the room worth addressing. You will leave Valmir Keep before dawn, Seraphine said. The words were soft. They did not need force. The room went still as death. Celine rose slowly, feet bare on cold stone. She kept her spine straight. Under what official order, my lady Seraphine stepped closer? Under the order of the only person here who has the power to decide what becomes of you. Celine held her gaze, though her stomach had turned to ice. Seraphine lowered her voice. You will go quietly, no messages, no goodbyes, no attempts to speak to His Majesty. You will vanish. Celine understood then. This was not punishment. This was erasure. She remained silent, and Seraphine's mouth curved faintly, pleased. You may refuse, Seraphine said. You may insist on staying. Her eyes flicked casually toward Mira and Elowen on their beds. But if the Alpha King learns I removed you. Seraphine paused as if considering the tragedy of it. It would be unfortunate if your two little friends disappeared before he could ask any questions. Alawen's face drained of color. Mira lurched upright. Don't touch them, she snapped. This is between you and her. One guard seized Mira by the arm, holding her still. Celine stepped forward, voice breaking for the first time. Don't hurt her. Seraphine's attention sharpened, satisfied. There we are, she murmured. That's what I needed. Selene stared at her, breath shallow. If I go, you will leave them alone, provided you are intelligent enough to disappear completely, Seraphine said. Her smile was small and deadly. Disappear like you never existed. Celine looked at Mira. Mira's eyes were furious, wet with unshed tears. She shook her head once hard. Celine looked at Elowen. Elowen's lips trembled, but she did not speak. The price was obvious. The choice was a blade at Celine's throat. Celine forced her voice steady. I will go. Seraphine nodded as if approving a servant for finally understanding her place. Good. She turned toward the door, then paused as if remembering something unimportant. And if you try to contact His Majesty? Seraphine's gaze returned lazy and cold. I will make sure your friends pay for your lack of discipline. Then she left, taking the candlelight with her. The darkness that remained was heavier than before. Mira tore her arm free the moment the guard released her and grabbed Selene's hands. No, she whispered fiercely. No, we will go together. Selene shook her head. If you come, she'll call it betrayal. She'll hurt your family. She'll hurt Elowen. Mira's voice broke. I don't care. Selene squeezed her hands once hard. I do. Alawen slid off her bed and wrapped her arms around Selene, small and trembling. Please, she whispered into Selene's shoulder. Don't leave like we'll never see you again. Selene hugged her back briefly, too briefly, because if she held on longer, she wouldn't be able to let go. I'm sorry, she murmured. Sorry was a useless word. It was all she had. She gathered her few possessions into a small cloth bag, an old scarf, a wooden comb, a worn book Elowen had once pressed into her hands like a secret treasure. It wasn't a life. It was proof she had existed. She left without looking back, because if she looked back, she would stay. And if she stayed, Mira and Elowen would pay. Outside the gates, the night wind cut hard. The moon was mercilessly bright silver on road dust. Each step jarred Selene's bruised shoulder from the ravine fall. Pain flared through her ribs when she breathed too deeply. She walked faster. The bond in her chest pulled backward toward the keep, toward the king she was terrified of wanting. She fought it. I'm only a servant, she whispered into the empty road. I've never had anything worth keeping, and somehow I can still make people lose everything. The thought of Mira and Elowen being dragged into darkness because of her made her stomach twist, so she kept walking. She did not realize how far she had gone until the horizon paled slightly and the forest began to smell like morning. Kyle woke before dawn, sitting upright in bed, as if a hand had yanked him by the spine. It wasn't sound that woke him. It was absence. The bond he had felt in the days since the rite, unspoken but real, like a thread stretched too tight, suddenly went slack, not broken, not severed, just far. The wolf inside him surged awake, furious. Kyle was out of bed before he fully thought. He pulled on boots and a tunic and stalked down the corridor like a storm given human shape. He tested the air as he moved. Scent, stone, dust, the keep's perfume, servant's sweat. Selene's scent, faint, fading, leading away. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. He found Ronan at the turn of the stairwell. Ronan took one look at his face and stopped asking questions. Who allowed this? Kyle demanded. Ronan's eyes widened. Your Majesty. Kyle didn't slow. He headed straight for the servant wing. When he reached Selene's door, it was closed and dark. He pushed it open. Empty. The bed was disturbed, but the air in the room no longer held her warmth. Kale's vision narrowed. The wolf's rage pressed against his ribs like claws. He turned and strode down the hall, ignoring servants who flattened themselves against walls. He kicked open the door to Matron Hester's office. Wood slammed into stone. Papers flew. Hester dropped to her knees instantly. "Your Majesty, where is Celine?" Cale demanded. Hester's lips trembled. I don't know." Cale's aura exploded outward, dominance slamming into the room with enough force that Hester flinched. The windows rattled. "Who touched what is mine?" Kyle said, voice low, and the words were not diplomacy. They were the wolf speaking through him. Hester sobbed once. My Lady Kyle's head snapped toward the doorway. Seraphine stood there perfectly dressed as if dawn had not reached the sky. Her expression was composed. Her eyes were unreadable. "If your Majesty is searching for a maid," Seraphine said calmly, "servants running away is not unheard of." Kyle's gaze pinned her. "You're lying." Seraphine's smile was faint. "Your Majesty is insulting the lady of this keep." "No," Cale said, stepping toward her. "I'm giving you one last chance to tell the truth." Seraphine held his gaze in silence, and in that silence, Cale understood everything. Ronan appeared at his shoulder, voice tight. "Your Majesty," Horse Kyle snapped. "6 men. Now." Ronan moved instantly. Kyle's eyes stayed on Seraphine. "If she is harmed because of you," he said quietly, "Valmir. Keep will pay. Stone by stone." Seraphine's throat worked once a tiny sign of fear she would have denied, but she said nothing. Cale turned away without waiting for permission to end the conversation. The gates opened as the first gray light crept into the world. Kyle rode out like a man who no longer cared, who watched him break etiquette. The wolf inside him was on its feet, pacing and snarling, and the scent thread he had memorized from the right, Celine's scent, sharp and unmistakable, pulled him forward through morning mist. He found her trail on the road within minutes. It was faint, mixed with damp earth and crushed leaves, but to him it was brighter than smoke. He followed it into the trees where the road narrowed into an old forest path. When he finally saw her, she was standing in the middle of the trail as if she had stopped running out of exhaustion or out of some deeper surrender. Her cloak hung wrong on her shoulders. Her face was pale. Dirt smudged her hem. The cloth bag in her hands looked too small to contain a life. Kyle dismounted a few steps away. He didn't rush. He didn't soften his anger into gentleness the way kings sometimes did when they wanted to pretend power could become kindness. He walked toward her with the calm of something that had chased long enough. "You ran again," he said. Celine kept her gaze lowered. "I didn't have a choice. Look at me." Slowly, so slowly, it felt like pain. Selena raised her eyes. Kyle saw the fear there, but beneath it he saw something else: exhaustion and hurt, and the stubborn pride of someone who had survived by refusing to beg. Kyle's voice lowered. "Who did this?" Selene shook her head once. "Don't ask. I will ask until you answer." Her lips pressed together. Then something in her cracked, and the words that spilled out were not defiance, they were truth. "You don't understand," she whispered. Kyle stopped an arm's length away, holding himself still. The wolf inside him pressed forward, demanding, but Kyle forced it down. He had already frightened her once in the forest. He would not do it again if he could help it. Celine lifted her chin, finally looking at him without flinching. "I'm not afraid of being punished," she said, voice trembling. "I've lived my whole life being punished in small ways. Being ignored, being used, being reminded I'm nothing." Kyle's jaw tightened. "What I'm afraid of?" Celine continued, and her voice broke, "is that every time you come near me, everything around me starts to fall apart." Kyle's eyes sharpened. "My friends were threatened," Celine said. "The keep looks at me like I'm a mistake. And you—" She swallowed hard, blinking fast. "You are the Alpha King. Maybe your wolf reacted to a scent. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was an animal's curiosity. Something that will pass." Kyle opened his mouth, but Celine rushed on as if she had to get the words out before courage died. "If I step into your world," she said, voice ragged now, "I will be crushed. If you pull me into it without truly choosing me, without wanting me as a man, not just as a wolf, I will die before I ever get to stand beside you." Silence filled the forest. Kyle felt something inside him shift. Not the wolf, but the man. He had been raised to believe the world owed him obedience. Selena's fear was not obedience. It was something far rarer. It was the honest terror of someone who understood exactly how cruel the world could be. Kyle stood still a few seconds, letting the weight of her words settle. Then he spoke, and his voice was quieter than it had ever been when addressing anyone outside his inner circle. "My wolf found you first," he said. Selena's breath hitched. Kyle took one slow step closer, not crowding her, not forcing her back, just closing distance with care. "But I chose you," after he said. Selene stared at him as if trying to catch him in a lie. "I could have sent hunters," Kale continued. "I could have let Counsel drag me into negotiations and pretend the right was an accident. I could have convinced myself it was only instinct." His hand lifted and rested against his own chest where the bond pull had been gnawing at him like hunger. "I didn't." He met her eyes, unwavering. "I chose not to turn away." Selena's lips parted. Her eyes shone with tears she did not wipe away. "And I will keep choosing you," Kyle said, voice steady and absolute, "even if the whole kingdom stands against it." Selene trembled not from cold, but from the shock of hearing someone powerful speak like that without demand hidden in it. "You shouldn't," she whispered. "I'm not being kind," Kale said, and for the first time, something like a faint smile touched his mouth. "I'm being honest." He reached up and brushed his fingers along her cheek, wiping a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. His touch was warm, steady, unhurried. Selene's voice broke completely. "I don't know how to survive this." Kyle leaned closer forehead, nearly touching hers. "Then let me carry the parts you can't," he murmured. Selene gave a small, wet laugh that sounded like pain and relief tangled together. Then before fear could seize her again, she gripped his tunic and pulled him down. The kiss was not a tentative brush like the rooftop had almost been. It was real. It was a choice. Kale's hands went to her waist, holding her, as if he had been afraid she would vanish if he loosened his grip. The bond pull that had been like a wound softened, settling into something quieter, something that felt for the first time like it belonged. When they finally parted, Kyle kept his forehead against hers. "Still want to run?" he asked, voice rough. Selene closed her eyes, breathing hard. "Not now." Kyle kissed her again, softer this time, as if sealing the promise into her skin. Then he pressed his mouth to her temple. "I'm taking you back," he said. Selene's eyes flew open. "Back to Valmir, back where I can protect you." Kale corrected. Selene swallowed. "My friends, I'll make sure they're safe," Kyle said immediately. Selene studied his face, searching for mockery, for false comfort. She found only certainty. So she nodded once, small and shaking, and let him lift her onto his horse with careful hands, as if she were something precious and fragile and furious all at once. When they returned to Valmir, Keep the Courtyard froze again. Servants stopped mid-step. Nobles went still. Guards tightened grips on spears. Cal dismounted first and reached up to help Selene down openly, as if the act itself were a declaration. Seraphine stood on the steps, face pale and controlled. Counselors and elders from Kale's retinue had arrived behind him, called by Ronan's urgent messengers. Kyle faced the gathered crowd. "Listen," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the way thunder carried. Silence fell. "There will be no other queen," Kyle said. A counselor swallowed hard, trying to speak. "Your Majesty." "There is nothing to negotiate," Kyle cut in, calm as ice. He glanced at Selene beside him, and the simple look was more intimate than any touch. "The one who will stand beside me is her." A shock rippled through the courtyard. Selene felt it in the way noble ladies stiffened, in the way servants stared, as if seeing a ghost, in the way Seraphine's fingers tightened on the stone rail. Kyle did not flinch. As he turned to lead Selene inside, Elder Thorian Voss, who had arrived with the elders, suddenly halted. Another elder turned sharply to him. They exchanged a glance, silent, alarmed. Selene felt nothing, only the persistent warmth of Kale's hand at her lower back guiding her forward. But the elders felt it. Something in the air around Selene had changed, a scent beneath scent. a vibration too faint for ordinary perception. Moon-touched, not human. Thorian's voice was barely audible, meant only for the elder beside him. Do you feel that? The other elder nodded, face tight. Thorian's eyes followed Celine's steps, and the cold certainty in him shifted into something else. Caution and fear. That night, while the keep tried to pretend it wasn't balancing on the edge of a knife, the elders met in secret. Thorian summoned 3 of the oldest keepers of moonrites to a chamber rarely used except for oaths and prophecies. No counselors, no nobles, no witnesses who could gossip, only those who understood bloodlines and the old laws that ran deeper than crowns. They gathered around a stone table etched with pack symbols. Thorian spoke first. This is no longer only scandal, he said. This is something else. They reviewed every detail. Kale had broken the lunar choosing right for her. The bond between them pulled with unusual force. Kyle's aura had shifted since she accepted him, and Celine's presence carried a moon vibration no human could hold. Elder Malus Thorn arrived, last leaning on a carved staff. Her hair was white as ash. Her eyes were sharp as winter. When she spoke, her voice was nearly a whisper. If she is what I think she is, Malus said, then this is not the king choosing unwisely. Thorian frowned. Then what is it? Malus rested her hand on the table. The moon returning what was stolen. They sent for the oldest servant records, original pages, not copies. They examined ink and torn edges, faded stamps, and gaps where something had been scraped away. In Celine's entry, Malus found a trace barely visible of an old seal beneath the scraping. Not a house seal. A registry mark. Moon registry. Thorian's mouth tightened. No one scrapes a registry seal from a servant record. Malus turned pages in a leather-bound archive and stopped at a brittle sheet. There is a bloodline, she said softly, rare old. A line of women touched by moon law itself. Some called them true Luna. She looked up. They do not always awaken young. Many live half-human until the correct trigger brings the wolf out. Thorian's voice went low. What trigger? Malus's gaze sharpened. A bond with an alpha powerful enough to call it. Silence settled. The pieces began to fit with terrifying precision. Before dawn, Kale was summoned to the moon chamber. He arrived ready for politics. Ready for lecture? Instead, Thorian placed an ancient scroll on the table and said carefully, Your Majesty, we do not believe Selene is human. Kale's eyes did not widen. I know. The elders paused, unsettled by how quickly he accepted it. Kyle tapped the scroll once. Tell me the rest, Malus spoke. She may be a dormant moon-blood wolf, a bloodline of true Luna line. Kyle went still. The air around him tightened, not with rage, but with the focus of someone hearing the name of something he had never allowed himself to believe in. If that's true, Kyle said, voice quiet as blade edge, then someone buried her identity when she was a child. Milus's eyes held his. Yes. Kyle did not let Selene hear the truth from anyone else. He went to her at first light. She stood by a tall window in the west wing, watching the courtyard as if waiting for the next blow. She turned when he entered and read his expression instantly. What happened? She asked. Kyle hesitated only a beat, just long enough to choose honesty over gentleness. You're not human, he said. Selene's hands tightened on the window ledge. Not disbelief, not exactly. More like a quiet dread finally receiving a name. Kyle explained it all. Moon bloodline, dormant wolves, the true Luna bloodline that had vanished into rumor. The registry seal scraped from her records, the torn pages, the suspicion that her past had been erased by design. Selena listened without interrupting. Face-pale eyes fixed on a point beyond the glass. When he finished, she spoke in a voice that barely rose above the wind. So I wasn't nobody because I was born that way. Kyle stepped closer. No. Selena swallowed hard. Someone made me nobody. Kale's jaw tightened, and I will drag that truth into daylight. Selena finally looked at him. If you do, the court will explode. Let it. Kyle said, immediate and unwavering. I'm tired of letting other people decide who is allowed to exist. For a moment, Selene's expression shifted, something fragile and fierce at once. Then she nodded as if accepting that her life had crossed a line it could never return from. But rumor outran truth. The moment it became clear Cale would not bend, would not quietly return to his political path, noble houses began to panic. For some, a servant queen was humiliation. For others, the threat was deeper. If Celine's identity was tied to an old bloodline purge, then history might turn its face toward them and demand payment. In the West Gallery of the royal castle, a secret meeting formed. House leaders, counselors with ambitions, noble men and women who had built their lives on the idea that the world was stable. They spoke in low voices. She's an imposter. He's moon mad after the right. We cannot let the throne be ruled by a servant sent. Seraphine was not seated at the center like a leader. She did not need to be. Her presence at the far end of the gallery was enough cold, silent permission without command. The plan was simple. Not noble, not legal, but effective. Before Celine could be publicly recognized, she would disappear. And if she disappeared, Cale's claim would become madness instead of destiny. The attempt came that same night. A council session was underway in the Great Hall, elders and counselors locked in debate over whether Cale could announce the bloodline findings publicly without igniting civil unrest. Celine waited in an antechamber beside the hall with 2 royal guards outside her door. Cale had insisted on keeping her near. The bond between them was steady now, a living line of awareness. If she was frightened, he would feel it. If he was angry, she would know. She sat on a bench trying to breathe through the sensation of being watched by a world she could not see. Then the candles in the west corridor went out all at once, not one by one, all. Darkness rushed in like water. A metallic click sounded and then a muffled scream cut off abruptly. Celine rose instantly, heart slamming. The door exploded inward. Men in house colors surged into the room blades, catching faint light from the remaining candles. And this one of them snarled, lunging. Celine stumbled back, and then she moved. Not like the girl who had run through the forest. She grabbed the heavy brass candlestick from the table and swung it hard into the attacker's wrist. Bone cracked. The man screamed. Another rushed her. Celine dodged faster than she should have been able to. Her body moved like it knew before her mind did. She backed toward the tall stone window, breath sharp. Hands seized her arm. A short blade pressed near her ribs. If she dies before she's crowned, the man hissed. Then the king's obsession dies with her. Something in Celine snapped. Not courage, not anger. A door inside her chest that had been pounding for days, weeks, years, trying to open. The bond flared hot and bright. Moonlight seemed to pour into her blood, not through eyes, but through marrow. Celine screamed, and the sound that came out was not entirely human. Silver gold light erupted around her like a wave. Her eyes turned fierce gold. Her nails sharpened into claws. Power surged through her limbs, not brute strength, but something lunar and ancient like the forest in the grove had always known her name. The man holding her was thrown backward as if hit by an invisible force. He crashed into the wall and collapsed. The other attackers froze. Not because a servant had fought back, because what stood before them now was a bloodline they had been taught was dead. Kyle burst into the antechamber at that exact moment, breath, hard eyes blazing. He stopped for a single heartbeat when he saw Selene wreathed in pale silver light, her aura shimmering like moonfire. He did not look afraid. He looked certain. All of you. Kyle growled, and the alpha aura rolled out like thunderkneel. Some did instantly, bodies obeying before minds could resist. Those who didn't had no time to regret it. Kyle moved like a blade in darkness, striking fast, precise. He knocked one attacker into a stone column hard enough to drop him. Another tried to run and was intercepted by Ronan and the loyal guards flooding in behind him. But the most shocking thing was not Kyle's violence. It was Selene standing upright beside him, breathing hard eyes still gold, refusing to hide behind his body. An older counselor fell to his knees, shaking. We were protecting the kingdom from an imposter. Selene turned her head slowly, and her gaze held the weight of Moonlaw itself. "You're not afraid of imposters," she said, voice low and clear. You're afraid of someone like me standing where you believe only the right blood belongs. The words landed heavier than any blow, because every noble in that corridor knew it was true. The rebels were dragged into the great hall. The entire court gathered elders, counselors, nobles who had arrived for the chaos servants watching from the edges like frightened birds. No one whispered about servant anymore. All eyes were on Celine. Her hair was loosened from the struggle. Her breath still uneven, but something about her had changed. The aura around her, thin but undeniable, made the air feel different. It wasn't dominance like Kale's. It was law, recognition, moonlight given form. Elder Malus stepped forward. Without hesitation, she sank to one knee on the stone floor. Gasps rippled through the hall. An elder kneeling before the girl who had once poured tea. Milus's voice carried without volume. The moon has named her. Elder Thorian moved next. He stared at Selene a long moment, then lowered himself as well. The true Luna bloodline still lives, Thorian said, and his voice held both shame and reverence. And this kingdom will not repeat the old sin. One by one, the elders bowed their heads, not to scandal, to sacred law older than crowns. The coronation was held in the same hall that had once watched Selene scrub floors in silence. Moon banners hung from the rafters. Royal fire burned in braziers bright and steady. The air smelled of incense and iron and something older. Selene entered in ceremonial dress that did not try to make her into someone else. It was silver and soft ivory threaded with moon thread along the sleeves, elegant, restrained, unmistakably sacred. Her hair fell loose down her back. Her face was calm. Not because she wasn't afraid, because she had crossed through fear already and found herself on the other side. Kyle stood waiting in the center of the hall. His eyes followed her without apology. The bond between them pulsed, steady, no longer a wound, no longer a hunt. A connection that held. Thorian lifted an ancient crown older than most houses in the room. A crown made not for political queens, but for those touched by moon law. He did not offer it to Kale. He looked at Selene first. "Do you accept this place by your own will?" he asked. Selene did not look at the crowd. She looked at Kale, and in his gaze she found the answer she had needed since the night in the forest. Not just instinct, not just desire, but choice, endless and deliberate. "Yes," Selene said. Thorian placed the crown on her head. The hall did not erupt into cheers. It fell silent for one sacred heartbeat, as if the entire kingdom had to adjust its understanding of reality. Then Kale stepped closer, took Selena's hand, and lifted it slightly, public, undeniable. This was not a rumor, this was the new law. After the formalities, when the court waited for Selena's first demand, as queen, many expected vengeance. They expected her to ask for blood. Instead, Selene spoke calmly, voice carrying across the hall. "I want Mira Fenlo and Elowen Breyer brought to the royal court under my protection." Mira, standing among the servants at the edge, froze, then burst into tears in front of everyone. Elowen bowed her head, crying silently. They were named Ladies of the Queen. That same hour, no longer shadows that could be threatened in the night. As for Seraphine, evidence of House Valmir's involvement, old seals erased records. Quiet support of rebellion was presented in cold detail. Kale did not hesitate to strip her house of key privileges. Selene did not ask for Seraphine's death. Seraphine was exiled south, stripped of inheritance and court representation, forced to live long enough to watch the crown she believed was hers sit on another woman's head. For Seraphine, it was a punishment worse than execution. Late that night, when the castle finally fell quiet, Selene stood alone on the royal balcony. The wind was cool. Moonlight washed over pale stone. The crown no longer felt heavy. It felt strange, like a new skin she had not yet learned to wear. Behind her, she felt Kyle before she heard him. He stepped close, arms sliding around her waist, holding her with quiet steadiness. "Are you going to run again?" Kyle asked, voice low. Selena let out a soft laugh and leaned back into him. "Only if you keep chasing me." Kale pressed a kiss to her temple. "I'll chase you for the rest of my life." Selene turned her head slightly, looking up at him. In the moonlight, his eyes were not blazing gold, they were warm. "And I," she said quietly, surprising herself with how certain it felt, "will stop running." Below them, the capital slept, unaware for the moment of how thoroughly the world had shifted. Above them, the moon hung full and bright, the same moon that had watched a servant girl hide behind an oak and a king break sacred law to follow the scent he could not ignore. But now the moonlight fell on two figures standing openly together, Alpha King and True Queen, no longer hiding, no longer hunted by rumor, no longer defined by what others allowed them to be. The bond between them was complete, and the kingdom, after scandal and fear and rebellion, finally bowed to a simple truth it could not erase again. Some names were called by the moon, and no power on earth had the right to silence them. What began with one forbidden glance ended beneath the moon with a kingdom forced to kneel before the woman they once tried to erase. Thank you for staying through Selene and Kale's journey. If this story pulled you in, let us know your favorite moment in the comments below. And if you enjoy powerful werewolf romances like this, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story waiting under the moon.